He hadn't called in over a decade, then stood at my door asking for $300,000. But what unfolded wasn't a financial plea. It was the unraveling of everything we'd buried: secrets, silence, and a truth that rewrote our entire history. I told him to come back tomorrow. I didn't know I'd be opening more than just my front door. It was a quiet Thursday evening, the kind Eleanor had grown to appreciate in her small Michigan town. The hum of cicadas whispered through the screen door, and the smell of fresh-cut grass lingered in the air. She sat in her worn but comfortable recliner, a book resting open on her lap, its spine barely touched in the last hour. Her thoughts had drifted again, always inevitably, to Nathaniel. Her son had once been a bright-eyed boy with a love for building things: Lego sets, pillow forts, makeshift tree houses cobbled together with duct tape and salvaged wood. But the years had worn down that boy, shaped him into someone she no longer recognized. It had been 11 years since she'd last seen him. 11 birthdays, 11 Christmases, and every Mother's Day passed without so much as a call. She often wondered if she'd done something unforgivable, something that had justified his absence, or if it was simply easier for him to disappear than confront what had broken between them. There had been hurt, yes, plenty of it. But wasn't there also love? Hadn't she tried to be enough, even when everything in her life was falling apart? The sound of knocking broke the spell. 3 slow, deliberate raps against the front door. It was already past dusk, and visitors at this hour were rare. Eleanor rose slowly, her knees protesting. She peered through the peephole and froze. Nathaniel, older now. His once boyish face had hardened, and there was a sharpness in his eyes she didn't remember. His hair was shorter, his jaw covered in a neatly trimmed beard. He looked like a stranger wearing her son's skin. She opened the door but said nothing. "Mom," he said simply, his voice gravelly and uncertain. "Can I come in?" She hesitated. The scent of tobacco clung faintly to his clothes, something she'd never known him to touch. His hands were fidgeting, wringing together as if he was rehearsing a plea. Still, she stepped aside and let him pass. The living room had changed little since he'd last seen it, a living museum of Eleanor's solitude. Framed pictures on the mantel, a crocheted afghan folded over the couch, and a faded rug that bore more stories than either of them could recount. He didn't sit. Instead, he paced, glancing at the decor like he was searching for something to anchor him. Finally, he turned to her. "I need your help," he said. Eleanor's arms folded instinctively, a protective gesture. "Nathaniel," she began, cautious, "you disappear for over a decade and now you show up needing something? What is it?" He ran a hand through his hair, hesitating. "It's not easy for me to be here. You think I wanted to come back like this?" "Then why now?" she pressed. "I need money," he said bluntly. 300,000. The words landed like a slap. She blinked. 300. "Nathaniel, what are you talking about?" "It's a startup," he said quickly, defensive. "Real estate tech, a serious opportunity. I have partners, we've got traction, but I need capital. It's a bridge round. I didn't know who else to ask." Eleanor stared at him, stunned. "You didn't know who else to ask?" "I'm not here to fight," he said, softening. "I know I've been gone. I know it's a lot to take in." "That's an understatement." He sighed, looking down. "I'm trying, all right? This is me trying." Eleanor's mind raced. Was this desperation she was seeing? Manipulation? Or was he genuinely reaching out, hoping for a lifeline? She couldn't tell. Time had eroded her instincts about him. She wanted to scream, to ask why he'd never written, never picked up the phone. Where had he been when her father died, when she had her surgery? Why had she spent the last 10 years wondering if he was dead or simply indifferent? Instead, she said, "I can't make a decision like that tonight." "I'm not asking you to decide now," he replied quickly. "Just think about it, please." She nodded slowly, more out of necessity than agreement. "I want you to come back tomorrow," she said at last, her voice measured. "We'll talk more then." Nathaniel gave her a look that teetered between relief and suspicion. "All right." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "Thanks for opening the door, Mom. I wasn't sure you would." Eleanor didn't reply. She simply nodded again and watched him disappear into the night, his silhouette swallowed by the amber hue of the streetlights. When the door clicked shut, she pressed her back against it, breath caught somewhere between fury and heartbreak. $300,000, after all this time. As she returned to her recliner, Eleanor stared blankly at the untouched book, her mind churning. The past wasn't buried, it was merely dormant, waiting for the knock that would rattle it all loose. And tonight, that knock had come. Eleanor sat by the kitchen window, fingers wrapped around a mug of tea gone cold. Outside, the oak tree rustled gently in the breeze, its branches casting long shadows across the lawn. But her thoughts had turned inward, drifting uninvited into the caverns of memory she rarely dared explore. The past was not a foreign country. It was the house next door, too close to forget, too painful to visit. Her marriage to Richard had not started badly. He had charm in the beginning, the kind that felt safe, stable. He could be charismatic when he wanted to be, especially in public. But behind closed doors, the man she married became someone else entirely. Controlling, dismissive, cold. He governed the house like a quiet dictator, his authority woven into every aspect of daily life. He never needed to raise his voice. His silence was punishment enough. The disapproval in his eyes was often more withering than a slap might have been. And it wasn't just her who bore the weight of his discontent. Nathaniel had felt it too, subtly at first, in the way Richard dismissed his ideas or scolded him for showing emotion. Later, it grew into something more insidious. Eleanor had let it happen. She didn't want to see it that way for a long time. Back then, she thought of herself as keeping the peace, playing her part, being a good wife. That meant not questioning, not contradicting, not protecting. She swallowed her voice so often it eventually stopped trying to speak. When Nathaniel cried after a bad dream, Richard would scoff, telling him to man up. And Eleanor, God help her, had echoed him once. Just once. But once was enough. The memory haunted her. She'd told herself she was surviving, that someday, when things calmed down, she'd make it right. But time slipped through her fingers, and Nathaniel grew up shaped by a home where vulnerability was weakness and affection was currency doled out sparingly. It wasn't until Richard's health began to fail that Eleanor truly began to see the shape of the life she'd been living. The last 2 years of his life were filled with bitter silences and hospital visits, and when he passed, the relief was laced with guilt, so thick she could hardly breathe. After the funeral, she began decluttering, both the house and her conscience. It was during one of those afternoons of cleaning that she found the letter. Tucked inside an old suit jacket in the back of Richard's armoire, the envelope was yellowed, the handwriting unmistakably his. It was addressed simply, "For Eleanor." She opened it with trembling hands. In it, Richard admitted something he had never confessed aloud. Nathaniel was not his biological son. Eleanor froze. She read the paragraph 3 times before the words made sense. Richard had known since Nathaniel was 3. A blood test from an emergency visit had revealed it. He never told her. Instead, he kept the secret, using it as a reason to distance himself from the boy he could never accept as his own. The letter did not name the other man. It did not accuse. It simply explained Richard's resentment and the walls he had built, not just around himself, but between Eleanor and her son. Eleanor sank to the floor, letter in hand. Her mind reeled, not just from the revelation, but from the implications. Nathaniel had grown up feeling unloved, unwanted, and now she knew part of the reason why. Her silence, her denial, had been built on a lie she didn't even know existed. And now he was back. Asking for money, yes, but more than that. Whether he knew it or not, he was reaching out. For help, for understanding, for something she still had a chance to give. Eleanor stared out the window, the world quiet around her. The letter lay on the table beside her, a symbol of everything unsaid, everything hidden. She would see Nathaniel tomorrow, and maybe finally they could begin to speak the truth. Morning crept in quietly, brushing the sky with tentative blue. Eleanor hadn't slept much. The letter from Richard had been tucked into a drawer, but its weight lingered in the air, thick and inescapable. Her hands moved methodically as she brewed coffee and laid out a tray of scones and jam, not out of hospitality, but instinct. some leftover impulse to maintain appearances even when everything underneath was crumbling. By noon, she had almost convinced herself he wouldn't show. But then came the knock. Nathaniel stood on the porch again, his posture stiffer than the night before. He looked tired. Maybe he hadn't slept either. His eyes darted to the tray on the table as she let him in, but he didn't comment. They sat across from each other in the living room, an old coffee table their only buffer. Eleanor noticed how his hands fidgeted with the zipper of his jacket. His discomfort was palpable. "So," she said, folding her hands, "tell me what this is really about." He met her eyes, guarded. "I told you, I'm starting something important. It could change everything." $300,000 worth of change? She asked, the edge in her voice sharper than she intended. "I know how it sounds. It sounds like my son vanishes for 11 years and walks back in asking for more money than I've ever had in my name." Nathaniel flinched but recovered quickly. "This isn't about the past. This is about what's next." "That's convenient," Eleanor said dryly. "Considering the past is the only part I still have to hold on to." He leaned back, folding his arms. "What do you want me to say? That I screwed up? I know I did. But I'm trying to make something of myself now. This startup, it's a chance, a way out of the mess I've made." "And that mess?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "Was I part of it?" He hesitated. "It's not that simple." Eleanor's breath hitched. "Try me." "I needed space," he said finally. "Everything about this house, about you, reminded me of him. Dad never looked at me like I was his. And I didn't know," she said quickly. "Nathaniel, I swear to you I didn't know." His brow furrowed. "Didn't know what?" She froze. She hadn't meant to say it. Not yet. But it was out now, dangling in the room between them. "Richard," she said slowly, "he knew you weren't his biological son. Since you were 3, he found out and never told either of us. I found the letter yesterday, hidden in his things." Nathaniel stared at her, unblinking. His mouth opened, then closed again. "You're serious?" She nodded. "I had no idea. I thought he was just distant. I thought it was me, or you, but it wasn't. Not entirely." He looked away, his face unreadable. The silence stretched long. "Is that why you stayed?" he asked, "even when you knew he was the way he was?" She nodded slowly. "At first I thought it would get better. Then I thought I could protect you. Then I just stopped thinking." Nathaniel's eyes glistened, but no tears fell. "I spent so many years wondering what I did wrong." "You didn't," she said, her voice trembling. "You didn't." He scrubbed a hand over his face. "And now what? You give me some money, we hug it out, and the past vanishes?" "No," she said, standing. "That's not what I want." "I don't even know if I can give you the money, Nathaniel, but I want to know who you are now. I want you to know who I am. I want to stop pretending that any of this was normal." He stood too, pacing a little. "I can't do therapy sessions or sit around talking about feelings. That's not me." "It never was," she said gently, "but maybe it needs to be." Nathaniel paused, exhaling deeply. "I need the money, Mom. That's why I'm here." "I know," she said, "but that's not why you stayed last night, is it?" He didn't answer, just looked away, shoulders hunched like the boy who used to cry himself to sleep in the next room. Eleanor stepped toward him. "Stay for dinner. We don't have to fix everything today, but let's start." He hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." She moved to the kitchen, heart pounding with fear and hope in equal measure. Behind her, Nathaniel sat down. The return had begun. Dinner had been quiet. Too quiet. The clink of forks against ceramic plates, the hum of the refrigerator, the occasional throat clearing. Each sound punctuated the silence between Eleanor and Nathaniel. Neither had the appetite to fill their plates again, but both had lingered long after the meal, circling around a conversation that had grown impossible to avoid. Eleanor reached for the drawer beneath the sideboard and pulled out the letter. The paper was still creased from where she'd folded it the day before. She placed it gently on the table between them. "I want you to read this," she said. Nathaniel stared at it, his brows knitting. "What is it?" "Just read it." she repeated, softer. He unfolded it, and as his eyes moved over the words, Eleanor watched his face change. First confusion, then something darker, disbelief, hurt. His jaw tensed, and his fingers began to tremble halfway through. When he finished, he set the letter down slowly as if it might explode. He knew, Nathaniel said quietly. He knew the whole time. Eleanor nodded. Since you were 3. He never said a word, not to me, not to you. And he used it, Nathaniel said bitterly. He used it to poison everything between us. Yes, Eleanor admitted. I didn't understand it back then. I just thought he was cold. I thought it was me, or you, but it wasn't. I blamed you, Nathaniel said. For years, I thought you sided with him, that you didn't want me either. Eleanor's throat tightened. I didn't know how to be anything but small in that house. Richard, he had this way of shrinking people. Nathaniel pushed away from the table, pacing. You know, I always thought there was something wrong with me. Like maybe if I had just been more like him, he would have loved me. There's nothing wrong with you, she said, but there was something very wrong with how we lived. He turned, eyes wet. Why didn't you leave him? The question hung heavy. Because I thought I was protecting you. Because I believed it was better to endure than to shatter the illusion of family. Because I didn't know I was allowed to leave. Nathaniel looked away. I want to break this, Eleanor said. This cycle, the lies, the silence. I want to rebuild something with you if that's even possible. He sat again, rubbing his temples. You're sure he's not my father? There was never another man, she whispered. That's the worst part. Richard was wrong, but he believed it. And he let that belief ruin both of us. Nathaniel went still. After a long silence, he said, I have to tell you something. Eleanor's stomach twisted. What is it? The startup, he began. It's not real, at least not the way I made it sound. She stared at him. I owe money, he said. A lot of it. Gambling, loans, some of the people I borrowed from. They're not the kind you negotiate with. Her breath caught. Nathaniel, I was desperate. I thought maybe if I could convince you it was an investment, I wouldn't have to see the look on your face when I told you the truth. She sat back, feeling the weight of it all settle into her chest. I'm not asking you to save me, he added. I just didn't know where else to go. Eleanor looked at her son, her broken, desperate son, and saw not just the man he was, but the boy he'd been. Frightened, alone. I don't have $300,000, she said, but I'll help you figure this out. Not with lies, not with cover-ups, with truth, with honesty, with accountability. He nodded, shame shadowing his features. I'm not going to let this destroy us too, she said firmly. We've both lived under the weight of someone else's darkness for too long. Let's deal with ours in the light. Nathaniel wiped at his eyes, nodding again. All right. Eleanor reached across the table and took his hand. It starts now. The morning after their conversation felt heavier than the one before. Eleanor stood by the kitchen window, a cup of coffee growing cold in her hands, watching a pair of blue jays argue over territory near the feeder. She envied their clarity, their primal certainty. There was nothing ambiguous about survival in the animal kingdom. You fought, you fled, or you adapted. Humans were more complicated. They buried pain beneath decades of silence. They rewrote history to cope. They passed on their fears like heirlooms. Nathaniel was still asleep in the guest room, if he'd slept at all. Eleanor hadn't heard a sound from him since he closed the door behind him the night before. She, on the other hand, had slept only in fragments, her mind a carousel of memories and regrets. The letter, the lies, the gambling. Her first instinct was fear. What if these people came looking for him? What if he owed money to the kind of men who didn't knock before entering? Her second instinct was anger. How could he lie like that? How could he manipulate her, again, just to avoid facing the truth? But beneath all that was something quieter, something far more painful. Recognition. Richard had lied too, lied with charm, with poise, with such conviction that Eleanor had believed she was the problem for most of her adult life. Her silence, her obedience, her erasure, all in the name of keeping the family together. Nathaniel hadn't invented his damage. He'd inherited it. She thought back to her own mother, another woman who'd chosen to endure instead of disrupt, a woman who'd taught Eleanor, not with words, but with sighs and silences, that women should hold the family's pain like a secret between their teeth. Smile with full plates and empty hearts. Never raise your voice. Never leave. Even when staying breaks you, that legacy had been passed down like fine china, fragile, dangerous, revered, but Eleanor was done preserving it. She walked to the guest room and knocked softly. "Yeah?" came Nathaniel's voice, groggy but alert. "Can we talk?" A pause. Then, "Yeah, just give me a sec." They met in the living room 10 minutes later. He looked worse for wear, dark circles under his eyes, shoulders hunched as if bracing for impact. "I didn't sleep much," he admitted. "Me neither," Eleanor said. A silence stretched between them before she broke it. "I've been thinking about everything about how we got here." Nathaniel didn't respond, only stared down at his hands. "You didn't invent this," she said. "This pain, this pattern. You walked into a family that was already broken. I see that now." He looked up, eyes uncertain. "That doesn't excuse the lies," she added, "but it explains the fear, the shame, the running." Nathaniel's voice was thin. "I never knew how to stop running." "I know," she said, "because I never knew either." He looked at her, really looked at her, for what felt like the first time in years. "I don't have $300,000, she continued. "And even if I did, giving it to you wouldn't fix anything. It'd just be another layer of silence on top of all the others." He nodded slowly. "I know that now. But I can offer something better, if you'll take it." Nathaniel tilted his head. "I want us to go to therapy," she said. "Together. I need to face what I did, what I didn't do, and I think you do too." His expression flickered. Uncertainty, maybe fear, then something else. "Relief. You do that?" "Yes, because I want to understand you, and I want you to understand me. Not through the stories Dad told us or the assumptions we made, but through truth." He hesitated. "What if it doesn't help?" "What if it does?" she countered. "We've tried everything else. Avoidance, anger, bargaining, none of it worked." Nathaniel gave a shaky laugh. "You sound like a therapist already." She smiled faintly. "I've had a lot of time to think." Another silence, but it felt different now. Not suffocating, settling. "Okay," he said. "Yeah, I'll go." Eleanor exhaled, not realizing she'd been holding her breath. "Thank you." They sat there for a while, neither needing to fill the quiet. Outside, the jays had stopped fighting. The feeders swung gently in the breeze, seeds undisturbed. Eleanor sipped her now lukewarm coffee and didn't mind the bitterness. She'd tasted worse. The waiting room was sterile and beige. Soft lighting, neutral tones, a framed print of a Monet lily pond on the far wall. Eleanor shifted uncomfortably in her seat, hands clutching her purse tighter than necessary. Across from her, Nathaniel bounced his knee, the rhythm stuttering like static. They hadn't spoken much during the drive. Not out of anger, more a quiet mutual agreement not to overfill the moment. Their minds were full enough. The door opened and a woman with short gray curls and a calm presence stepped out. "Nathaniel and Eleanor?" They both stood. "I'm Dr. Reese," she said, extending a hand. "Come on in." The office itself was warmer, a few mismatched chairs, bookshelves lined with thick volumes and framed quotes, tissues on every table. Eleanor suspected that wasn't accidental. They sat side by side, close but not touching. Dr. Reese smiled gently. "You can start wherever feels right. Or nowhere. Sometimes silence has a lot to say." Eleanor looked at Nathaniel. He nodded, signaling her to go first. "I haven't seen my son in over a decade," she began, voice thin, "until 4 days ago." "And how does it feel to see him now?" "Strange," she admitted, "like I'm meeting someone I already know but through a fog." Dr. Reese nodded, then turned to Nathaniel. "And you?" He took a breath. "It's hard, being here, being honest." "But you're here," she said. "That counts for something." He gave a hollow laugh. "I guess." Dr. Reese gave them space to speak, not pushing, just gently guiding. Eleanor talked about Richard, his cruelty, his control, the way he had rewritten reality in their household. Nathaniel listened, some pieces clicking into place. He remembered the tension in the air, the unspoken rules, the way Eleanor used to flinch when Richard entered the room. "I thought you were weak," Nathaniel confessed, "when I was younger. But now I think you were surviving." Eleanor's throat caught. "I was, but survival came at a cost." He nodded, looking at his hands. "It did." Over the next hour, stories spilled out like marbles rolling across the floor. Some collected gently, some cracked underfoot. Eleanor shared how she'd lost herself in her roles, wife, mother, victim, and how, over the years alone, she'd started peeling those layers away. "I'm learning who I am outside of the things I did for others," she said. "It's slow, but it's happening." Nathaniel listened, something in his face softening. "I never gave you that credit before. I just assumed you didn't care." "I did," she said. "So much it swallowed me." His voice cracked. "I was angry for so long. I blamed you because I couldn't understand how someone could let it happen." "I didn't think I had another choice," she replied, "but I know better now." He sat quietly, processing. "I've done some awful things. Lied, stolen, manipulated people who trusted me. I used to tell myself it was survival too, but it was just shame, disguised as ambition." Dr. Reese interjected gently. "Shame is powerful, but it's not fixed. We can reshape what we carry." They scheduled a follow-up. As they left, something about the world felt slightly less heavy, the air a bit clearer. In the third session, Nathaniel sat forward, restless. Dr. Reese noticed immediately. "You seem different today." He nodded. "I've been holding something back." Eleanor stiffened but stayed quiet. "I have a daughter," he said finally. "Her name is Lily, she's 7. The words struck like a bell. Eleanor blinked slowly, the sound of her own heartbeat loud in her ears. "She lives with her mother," Nathaniel continued. "We were never serious. I barely stayed long enough to know what being a father meant. I haven't seen her since she was a baby." Dr. Reese leaned in slightly. "And how do you feel about that?" "Like I've failed her already," he said. "Like the cycle is repeating and I'm watching it happen from the outside." Eleanor was silent for a long moment. "Why didn't you tell me before?" she asked softly. "I was ashamed," he said, "and scared you'd look at me the way you used to look at Dad." Her eyes filled, but her voice held steady. "You're not him, Nathaniel. The fact that you're afraid of becoming him proves it." He looked at her, fragile. "I don't want to be a ghost in her life," he said, "but I don't know how to come back from this." Eleanor reached across the space and rested her hand on his. "We figure it out, together." Dr. Reese watched them, no longer needing to guide. The conversation had started to lead itself. Healing had begun, not with perfection or promises, but with presence, with honesty, with the bravery of confronting what had been broken for far too long. Eleanor found Nathaniel on the back porch, his elbows on his knees, cigarette unlit between his fingers. He'd quit smoking years ago, he'd told her, but sometimes he still needed the ritual, the familiar weight of it, the illusion of control. "You're not going to light that, are you?" she asked gently. He looked up and gave a dry smile. "Wouldn't do much good, it's empty." She sat beside him, the old swing creaking softly under their combined weight. A spring breeze cut through the yard, rustling the tall grass along the fence. "You've been quiet since our last session," she said. Nathaniel nodded. "I've been thinking." "About Lily?" "About all of it." They sat in the quiet for a few more moments, the world muted but not still. "I was 23 when she was born," he said finally. "Sarah, her mom, was someone I barely knew. We were young and dumb and reckless. When she got pregnant, I panicked. I didn't know how to be a father. Hell, I didn't know how to be a functioning adult. So I ran." Eleanor nodded slowly. "And now?" "I'm still scared," he admitted, "but the guilt is worse than the fear now. She's out there, thinking she wasn't worth sticking around for. And that kills me." "You were taught to run from what scared you," Eleanor said. It was survival, but that doesn't mean it has to define you. Nathaniel turned to her, vulnerability etched deep into his expression. What if she hates me? What if Sarah slams the door in my face? She might, Eleanor said honestly, and she'd have every right, but that's not the point, is it? He looked away. The point is showing up, owning your mistakes, giving her the chance to decide for herself who you are now, not who you were. Nathaniel nodded, the idea settling into him like weight and wings at once. I want to meet her, he said. I want to tell her the truth. Eleanor reached over and took his hand. Then let's make a plan. He blinked at her. You'd come with me. If you want me there. I do, he said quietly. And just like that, a new chapter began, not with fanfare, but with choice, with intention. Over the next few days, they prepared. Nathaniel wrote letters he never sent, practiced what he might say, deleted and rewrote entire scripts in his head. Eleanor helped him sift through old photos and memories, offering gentle encouragement when he started to spiral. It doesn't have to be perfect, she reminded him more than once. It just has to be real. He nodded, absorbing the mantra like oxygen. They talked about what Lily might be like, her favorite color, her laugh, whether she liked books or bugs or both. Nathaniel admitted he didn't know much. Sarah had kept her distance, likely to protect their daughter from disappointment. She protected her from me, he said one night, the guilt fresh again. She protected her from who you were, Eleanor corrected. But you're not that man anymore. He nodded, clinging to the possibility. The morning they were set to meet Sarah and Lily, Nathaniel stood in front of the mirror, adjusting a collared shirt Eleanor hadn't seen in years. He looked sharp, but anxious. He turned to her in the hallway. You think she'll even remember me? She was a baby, Eleanor said gently. But today's not about memories, it's about beginnings. They drove in silence, hearts loud with hope and fear. Sarah had agreed to meet them at a park in the city, a public place, neutral ground. She'd been hesitant at first, but after a long and careful phone call, something in Nathaniel's voice had shifted her stance. When they arrived, Eleanor saw Sarah sitting on a bench under a cherry tree, a small girl beside her, dark curls pulled back in a pink ribbon. Lily. Nathaniel froze for a moment, staring, then took a breath. You ready? Eleanor asked. No, he said, but I'm going anyway. She smiled. That's enough. They walked toward the bench together, each step carrying years of silence, shame, and longing. And for the first time in decades, Eleanor wasn't walking away from her past. She was walking straight into it, shoulder to shoulder with her son. The park buzzed with late-morning life, children chasing each other across the playground, dogs tugging at leashes, the rhythmic squeak of swings rising and falling in time with laughter. But to Eleanor and Nathaniel, the world felt narrowed to the bench under the cherry blossom tree, where Sarah sat with their daughter. Lily was smaller than Nathaniel had imagined, all limbs and curiosity, with a pink ribbon tied neatly into her dark curls. She swung her legs under the bench in rhythmic arcs, staring intently at a juice box she hadn't yet opened. Sarah looked up as they approached, her expression unreadable, something between guarded and resolute. Nathaniel slowed to a halt a few feet away. Eleanor, standing just behind him, placed a steadying hand on his back. Hi, he said, voice barely above the wind. Sarah stood. Hi. It had been years since they'd last spoken in person. Time had drawn sharp lines around her eyes, the kind that came from sleepless nights and hard-earned independence. You look, he started, then stopped himself. Thank you for coming. I did this for her, she replied evenly, not for you. He nodded. I understand. A long silence stretched between them before Eleanor stepped forward. I'm Eleanor, she said gently, Nathaniel's mother. Sarah gave her a small nod. I figured. Lily looked up now, wide brown eyes flicking between the unfamiliar faces. Eleanor smiled and knelt beside the bench so she was eye level with the child. Hi, Lily, she said warmly. I've heard a lot about you. Lily blinked, then looked to her mother, who gave a slight nod. Hi, Lily whispered back. I'm your grandmother. Eleanor continued, but you can call me whatever feels right to you, even just Eleanor. Do you like books? Lily asked suddenly. Eleanor laughed softly, surprised. I love books. Lily considered this. Me too. Nathaniel, still frozen near the path, finally took a tentative step forward. Sarah, I know there's nothing I can say that will undo the years I missed. I left you alone with all the hard parts. I was a coward. She didn't interrupt, but her jaw clenched slightly. I don't expect forgiveness, he said, but I want to try. I want to be in her life, in any way that makes sense, for both of you. Sarah was quiet for a long time. Lily climbed off the bench and wandered a few steps toward the grass, where Eleanor followed, crouching to pick a daisy with her. Finally, Sarah spoke. You know she's asked about you, she said. Nathaniel's eyes widened. She has. Not often, Sarah clarified, but enough. I told her you weren't around because you had things to figure out. I didn't want to lie, but I didn't want to make promises for you either. He nodded slowly. That was fair. Sarah's expression softened. She found some of your things a while back. Letters, photos, stuff you'd kept. I didn't even know you still had them. Nathaniel blinked. What? Where? The following weeks unfolded in soft, deliberate strokes. Small gestures, tentative steps, each day a quiet act of rebuilding. Eleanor and Lily began their mornings together, usually at the kitchen table where a stack of paper and a plastic cup full of colored pencils had become a fixture. Eleanor introduced Lily to word puzzles and watercolor painting, and in return, Lily taught Eleanor how to play an impossibly complicated board game about dragons and kingdoms. They laughed more than Eleanor had expected. Laughed in ways that loosened something tight in her chest, something she hadn't even realized she'd been holding on to. In the evenings, Nathaniel would often return from therapy sessions with a worn-out look, like someone who had been doing heavy lifting no one could see. And in a way, he had. Dr. Reese had him unpacking years of anger, guilt, and buried grief. His sessions were emotional marathons, but he never missed one. Some nights, Eleanor would find him at the kitchen counter scribbling in a battered notebook. She never asked to read it, and he never offered. But the way he clutched it to his chest before tucking it away said enough. These were the pieces of himself he was slowly learning how to name. One Saturday, they drove out to a local orchard where Lily picked apples with gleeful abandon. Filling Eleanor's tote bag faster than either of them could keep up, Nathaniel trailed behind them, smiling as he watched his daughter link arms with her grandmother, the two of them arguing good-naturedly about whether green apples were better than red ones. Later, over slices of Eleanor's homemade apple pie, they started brainstorming names for a new weekly tradition. Lily insisted on Sundays with sugar, while Eleanor leaned toward pie and paint. Nathaniel simply laughed and said he'd show up no matter what they called it. Their traditions didn't require grandeur. Sometimes it was just sharing a movie night on the couch or walking to the farmer's market together. They began to build a rhythm, each moment adding a stitch to the fabric of their newly forming bond. Eleanor found herself looking forward to the sound of Lily's feet thumping down the hallway, the earnest way she asked questions about the world, the sheer intensity with which she devoured new information. She was curious, compassionate, a little defiant, reminders of both her father and herself. One evening, Lily climbed into Eleanor's lap, holding a book, and asked, "Will you always be my grandma now?" Eleanor blinked back sudden tears and kissed the top of her head. "If you'll have me, sweetheart, I'll be your grandma forever." Nathaniel overheard from the doorway and didn't say a word, but when Eleanor looked up at him, he mouthed a silent "thank you." She nodded in return, overwhelmed by the quiet joy of being needed again, of being trusted. Nathaniel continued working with Dr. Reese, this time exploring what it meant to parent from a place of responsibility instead of shame. He was learning how to sit with discomfort instead of escaping it, how to listen instead of defend. "I used to think being a dad meant always having the answers," he confessed to Eleanor one night. "But it's more about showing up, even when you're scared." Eleanor sipped her tea thoughtfully. "Sounds like something your therapist might have said." He smirked. "She's smarter than me. I'm just finally listening." They talked more now, about things that once felt off limits. The way Richard's voice still echoed in both their minds. the false narratives they'd carried about each other, the quiet hopes they dared to hold for the future. It was never effortless. Healing never is, but it was consistent. It was real. And for Eleanor, it was transformative. She no longer felt like a woman adrift in her own life. She had routines, yes, but also meaning, purpose. She planted new flowers in her garden, cooked new recipes with Lily, began attending a book club at the local library. She was no longer just Eleanor the mother or Eleanor the widow. She was becoming Eleanor the woman, whole, in progress, alive. At night, she often found herself journaling again, something she hadn't done in years. Her entries weren't always profound. Sometimes they were just recaps of the day, notes on Lily's questions, musings about future holidays. But they felt like conversations with herself, a way of saying, I'm here, I'm still growing. The house that once echoed with emptiness now held the laughter of a child, the aroma of shared meals, and the quiet murmur of trust slowly returning to broken places. Eleanor no longer walked through her home bracing for ghosts. She walked with her head high, her heart open, and the knowledge that even broken bonds, when tended with care, could hold again. The cemetery was quiet, as most are, but Eleanor felt the hush in her bones. She stood at the edge of Richard's grave, hands trembling slightly as she tucked a folded letter into the pocket of her cardigan. The headstone was simple, just his name, birth and death dates, no inscription. No final words carved in stone. Eleanor had written hers instead. It had taken her months to decide to come, even longer to believe she needed to. She had driven past this place countless times since his death, each time gripping the steering wheel a little tighter, as though the weight of unfinished business could pull her off the road. But today she had chosen to stop. Today, she was ready. She knelt beside the grave, brushing away a few dry leaves that had gathered near the base of the stone. The wind carried the sharp scent of pine and fresh-cut grass. Spring always felt like a contradiction in places like this. So much life pressing up around the memory of the dead. "Hi, Richard," she said softly, surprised at the calm in her voice. She stared at the stone, waiting for something, an emotion, a memory, maybe a ghost, but there was only silence. "I'm not here to make peace with you," she said after a moment, "because peace was never what you gave me." Her hand slipped into her pocket and closed around the letter. "I'm here to close the door. On you. On everything you taught me to believe about myself. On every time I swallowed my voice so you could speak. On every lie I repeated just to survive." She took a breath. The air tasted sharp. "You made me afraid to exist outside of you. You made me think silence was safety and obedience was love, and I carried that forward, into my motherhood, into my son." Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. "For a long time, I blamed myself for what happened to Nathaniel, for not leaving sooner, for not protecting him better. I thought if I had just been stronger, braver, he wouldn't have turned into someone who lied, who ran, who broke things." She looked down at the letter in her hand. "But I've learned something. I wasn't weak, I was surviving, and I've stopped blaming myself for surviving the only way I knew how." She unfolded the letter and placed it gently against the base of the stone, weighing it down with a small rock. "I'm not writing to forgive you, Richard. I'm writing to forgive myself." She stood slowly, knees aching but her spine straight. For the first time, she felt taller than the man beneath her feet. "You don't get to haunt me anymore," she said. "That ends today." She turned and walked away, never once looking back. At home, the house felt warmer than it had when she left that morning. Lily was at school and Nathaniel was at therapy, but Eleanor didn't feel alone. She felt centered. She changed into her favorite sweater, brewed a cup of tea, and sat at the kitchen table, flipping through the mail. Bills, a gardening catalog, a handwritten envelope with no return address. Her heart stuttered. She opened it carefully. "Dear Eleanor, if this letter reaches you, it means I finally found the courage to face what we both buried. I saw your name in a community newsletter. The article was about the book club at the library. You were listed as a new member. I wasn't sure you'd want to hear from me. It's been so long, but I read the article 3 times before I found your address, and I took that as a sign. I've been in therapy. A lot has come up. About us, about Mother, about what we both lived through in that house. I didn't understand then why you clung to Richard the way you did, but I do now. We both ran toward the familiar even when it hurt. I miss you, Eleanor. I miss what we could have had if we hadn't been taught to fear ourselves. If you're willing to talk, I'm here. With love, Margaret Eleanor read the letter 3 times, her hands trembling by the end. Margaret, her sister, a name she hadn't spoken aloud in over 20 years. The pain of their childhood had fractured their bond long before Richard entered the picture. They had gone their separate ways, each carrying the shame of silence, each mistaking disconnection for protection. She leaned back in her chair, overwhelmed. The letter felt like a lifeline tossed across a chasm she hadn't dared to name. She thought of Nathaniel, of Lily, of what it had taken to rebuild their bridge. Could she try again? Not as the broken younger sister she had once been, but as the woman she was becoming, whole, resilient, in progress? Eleanor set the letter down and pressed a hand to her heart. There was room. Somehow, even after all of it, there was still room. They met at a quiet cafe near the edge of town. Eleanor arrived first, seated at a window booth with 2 mugs of tea already waiting, one chamomile, one peppermint. She wasn't sure which Margaret still preferred. She remembered her sister used to hoard tea bags like secrets, but decades had passed. Tastes changed. Margaret walked in a few minutes later. Her hair was silver now, clipped short, her frame leaner, slower in movement but steadier in presence. She carried a canvas tote over her shoulder and wore the same kind of knitted cardigan their mother used to wear, though Eleanor imagined that choice wasn't conscious. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Just looked at each other, seeing both the ghost of the past and the woman who remained. Then Margaret smiled, small, hesitant. Eleanor returned it. "Hi." "Hi," Margaret echoed, sliding into the booth. "You haven't changed much." Eleanor raised a brow. "Flatterer." They laughed softly, the tension thinning just a little. For the next hour, they spoke in fits and fragments, piecing together memories like a puzzle missing a few edge pieces. They talked about their mother, how she punished emotion, worshipped silence, treated obedience like a virtue. They talked about the men who had followed, some cruel, some simply absent, and how each of them had learned to survive in ways that hardened more than healed. "I used to think we were just fragile," Margaret said, stirring her tea. "Like we were born wrong, but I see now we were made that way, pressed into silence, shaped to stay small." Eleanor nodded slowly. "I lived inside someone else's idea of who I was supposed to be for a long time. And now? I'm still figuring it out," she admitted, "but I'm no longer afraid to look." They sat in a comfortable silence for a moment, 2 women quietly excavating decades of pain and discovering space beneath it. "I'd like to meet your family," Margaret said eventually, "if you think that's okay." Eleanor smiled. "I think they'd want that." A few days later, Eleanor invited Margaret to the house for dinner. Nathaniel offered to cook, his signature lemon garlic pasta, and Lily was in charge of place cards, carefully printing each name in bold purple marker. When Margaret arrived, Lily ran to the door first. "You must be Great Aunt Margaret," she announced proudly, waving a name card. Margaret blinked in surprise. "That's a first." Eleanor laughed. "She's big on titles." Margaret knelt. "Well, Miss Lily, I am honored to meet you." Nathaniel hovered nearby, arms folded but not unfriendly. Eleanor watched as he extended a hand. "Thanks for coming," he said. Margaret shook it firmly. "Thank you for having me." The meal was simple but warm, the conversation winding through introductions, stories, and small careful revelations. Margaret told Lily about a dog she had as a girl named Buttons and how he used to chew her socks. Nathaniel shared how he once got his arm stuck in a vending machine trying to retrieve a stuck candy bar. By the time dessert was served, something resembling comfort had settled in the room. Later, after Lily had gone to bed and the dishes were done, the adults lingered in the living room. "I wasn't sure I'd fit in," Margaret said quietly, sipping tea. "But you've built something beautiful here, Eleanor." "It wasn't always," Eleanor replied, "but we're trying to make it real now, not perfect, just honest." Nathaniel nodded. "We're still unlearning a lot." Margaret looked at them both. Breaking the cycle isn't just about changing how we parent, it's about changing how we connect, how we speak, how we hold space for each other. Eleanor leaned back, letting her sister's words sink in. It had taken them years, decades to reach this point. But here they were, a mother, a son, a child, and a sister. Not healed, not whole, but willing, present. And for the first time, their family wasn't bound by silence or survival, but by choice. They were choosing love, choosing trust, choosing connection. The table was set with Eleanor's best dishes, mismatched but full of memory. There were daisies in a mason jar at the center. The tablecloth was linen, faded but soft, and the scent of roasted chicken and rosemary floated warmly through the house. Outside, the last sliver of daylight disappeared behind the trees, casting golden light through the kitchen windows. Eleanor stood in the doorway for a moment, unnoticed, watching. Nathaniel was helping Lily fold napkins into awkward triangles, both of them giggling at the mess. Margaret poured water into glasses with a gentle focus, occasionally glancing at the others with the soft amazement of someone still getting used to being included. Eleanor let the scene imprint itself, this new shape of her family, full of texture and grace. "Mom," Nathaniel called, noticing her at last. "We're one napkin short. Lily says you're hiding extras." "I might be," Eleanor said with mock seriousness, "but only the most responsible dinner guests get access to the secret stash." Lily grinned. "That's me." They gathered around the table, laughter blending with the clink of silverware and the rustle of chair legs across the floor. It wasn't perfect. The wine was too sweet, the bread slightly burnt on the bottom, and Lily had declared the mashed potatoes too lumpy to be elegant. But none of it mattered. What mattered was the fullness in the room, the sense that something had been stitched back together, not as it once was, but in a form strong enough to hold. Margaret raised her glass. "To healing." Slow, messy, and sometimes stubborn, but worth every step. They clinked glasses, and Eleanor's eyes glistened. They ate, they talked. Stories poured out in waves, some funny, some sharp-edged, others unfinished. Eleanor listened as Nathaniel told Lily about his very questionable haircut phase in college. Margaret shared how she once burned an entire casserole because she'd gotten lost in a novel. They teased and teased back. They filled each other's sentences. They passed bowls and second helpings and, without realizing it, passed along something far more essential: belonging. After dinner, they migrated to the living room. Eleanor curled up in her favorite armchair, Lily nestled beside her with a coloring book, while Nathaniel and Margaret sipped coffee on the couch. The room was alive with warmth, with shared breath and shared silence. And in that silence, Eleanor reflected. How far they'd come. Not so long ago, her house had been quiet in the wrong ways, hollow, echoing with old regrets and closed doors. She had lived in the residue of a marriage built on control and in the aching void of a son lost to shame and distance. Her own voice had been a whisper, even to herself. But now? She looked at Nathaniel, more grounded than she'd ever seen him. He had weathered storms, most of them internal, and still shown up. For Lily, for himself. She looked at Margaret, whose reappearance had brought new layers to her understanding of their shared past. The abuse hadn't started with Richard, it had started long before, seeded in their childhood home and passed down like brittle heirlooms. But together, they had named it, faced it, started something different. And Lily, bright, irreverent, and impossibly wise for 7, was the living proof that it could be different, that the chain didn't have to continue. Eleanor's hand found Lily's hair, brushing it back gently. The girl looked up at her and smiled. "Grandma," she whispered, "this is the best dinner ever." "It is," Eleanor whispered back. "It really is." They sat that way for a while, a tangle of limbs and stories and memory, the kind of evening that didn't announce itself as extraordinary until much later, when its glow lingered in the heart like light through lace curtains. Before bed, Lily insisted on showing Margaret the scrapbook she and Eleanor had started. Each page was a chaotic collage, drawings, captions in crooked handwriting, taped-in leaves and dried flower petals. Margaret flipped through it with reverence, her eyes misting over a sketch of the 4 of them standing under a tree. Lily had drawn them all holding hands. Looks like someone captured the whole story, Margaret said softly. Nathaniel leaned over her shoulder. She's got an eye for truth. When the house finally quieted, Eleanor stepped out onto the porch. The night was crisp, stars blooming slowly across the sky. She wrapped her cardigan tighter and sat in the old rocking chair, the wood creaking under her, but not complaining. She had once feared this kind of peace would always be beyond her reach, that some families simply couldn't mend. That damage once done was permanent, but she no longer believed that. Pain could be inherited, yes, but so could healing. Not everything could be undone, but it could be rewritten, page by page, in late-night talks and therapy sessions, in laughter over pie, in apologies spoken and believed. Her family was not defined by what they had endured, but by how they had chosen to rise. Tomorrow they would continue the work. There would be more questions, more tears, more things to navigate. But tonight they had arrived, together, whole in their incompleteness. And that, Eleanor thought, watching the horizon begin to fade into blue, was a new kind of dawn. If this story touched something deep in you, don't just scroll away. Subscribe for more powerful, raw family dramas that explore the truths we hide and the healing we seek. Every week, we share stories that stay with you long after the screen fades. Hit that subscribe button and join a community where broken bonds find voice and sometimes redemption.